The year was 2147, and humanity had reached farther into the stars than anyone could have imagined just a century before. Colonies dotted distant planets, trade routes stretched across light years, and Earth itself had become a hub of innovation and progress. But with great expansion came great risk. The galaxy was vast, and humanity was not alone. For years, rumors of alien civilizations had circulated among scientists and explorers, but no one expected what happened next. It started with a signal, faint and distorted, picked up by deep space probes near the edge of human-controlled territory. At first, it was dismissed as interference or some glitch in the system, but then more signals followed, stronger and clearer. They were coming from a fleet, an enormous fleet, moving steadily toward Earth's borders. The ships were massive, far, larger than anything humanity had ever built, their designs sleek yet menacing. Analysts worked around the clock to decode the transmissions, but the language was unlike anything they had encountered before. One thing, however, was clear. This fleet belonged to a species called the Valith, and their intentions were unknown. Panic spread quickly through Earth's governments. Emergency meetings were held, and military leaders scrambled to prepare for the worst. The United Space Command, USC, humanity's primary defense force, activated every ship in its fleet. Battle stations were manned, weapons systems brought online, and pilots briefed on potential combat scenarios. It seemed like all of humanity was holding its breath, waiting to see if these aliens would attack or simply pass by. Among those chosen to lead the response was Captain Daniel Hayes, a man known for his calm demeanor and sharp mind. He had served in the USC for over 20 years, rising through the ranks thanks to his ability to think clearly under pressure. His ship, the Odyssey, was one of the most advanced vessels in the fleet. Equipped with cutting-edge technology and a skilled crew, it was designed to handle any situation, from exploration to warfare. Yet even Daniel felt uneasy about what lay ahead. The Valith fleet was unlike anything humanity had faced before, and no one knew how they would react when contact was made. As preparations continued, Daniel received a summons to meet with Admiral Laura Bennett, the commander of the USC. Her office was located aboard the Orbital Headquarters Station, a sprawling complex that served as the nerve center for Earth's defenses. When Daniel entered, he found her standing by a large window overlooking the assembled fleet. Hundreds of ships floated silently against the backdrop of space, their hulls gleaming in the sunlight. It was an impressive sight, but there was tension in the air. "Captain Hayes," Admiral Bennett said without turning around, "you've been selected for a special mission." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Daniel frowned slightly. Special missions usually meant higher risks, and given the current situation, he wasn't sure he wanted to hear what came next. "What kind of mission?" he asked cautiously. Admiral Bennett finally turned to face him, her expression grim. "We're not sending the entire fleet to confront the Valith," she said bluntly. "Only the Odyssey will go." Daniel stared at her, stunned. "Only us? Against an entire alien fleet? That doesn't make sense." "I know it sounds insane," Bennett admitted, crossing her arms, "but we have to assume the Valith are watching us. If we send our entire armada, it might look like we're preparing for war, and that could provoke them into attacking outright. Sending one ship shows restraint. It gives us a chance to assess their intentions without escalating things further." "But what if they decide to destroy us anyway?" Daniel pressed. "What happens then?" Bennett hesitated, her gaze dropping for a moment. "Then we'll deal with the consequences. This isn't just about winning a fight, Captain. It's about survival. We're gambling everything on you and your crew." Daniel didn't respond right. Away. He understood the logic behind the decision, but that didn't make it any easier to accept. The fate of humanity rested on his shoulders, and failure wasn't an option. Still, he nodded slowly, accepting the responsibility thrust upon him. "Understood, ma'am," he said firmly. "We won't let you down." Back aboard the Odyssey, Daniel gathered his senior officers in the briefing room to explain the situation. Among them were Lieutenant Rachel Monroe, the ship's tactical officer, Dr. Aaron Blake, the chief scientist, and Ensign Lucas Carter, a young pilot eager to prove himself. Each of them listened intently as Daniel outlined the mission, their expressions ranging from determination to disbelief. Rachel was the first to speak. "So we're basically walking into the lion's den alone," she said. her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "No backup, no reinforcements, just us." "That's correct," Daniel replied. "Our goal is to establish communication with the Veilith and determine their intentions. If they're hostile, we'll do whatever it takes to protect Earth. But we need to avoid provoking them unless absolutely necessary." Dr. Blake leaned forward, his brow furrowed in thought. "Have we learned anything new about their technology? Their ships seem far beyond anything we've developed." "Not much," Daniel admitted. "Their propulsion systems are completely different from ours, and their weapons, if they even have them, are still a mystery. That's why we need to proceed." Carefully, Lucas raised his hand hesitantly, drawing everyone's attention. What if they don't want to talk? What if they just attack on sight?" Daniel met the young ensign's gaze, his tone firm but reassuring. "Then we fight. But remember, our priority is to survive and gather information. Every second we stay alive gives Earth more time to prepare. Understood?" The room fell silent as the weight of their mission settled over them. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing an enemy they barely understood. Yet none of them voiced any objections. They had signed up for this life knowing the risks, and now it was time to rise to the occasion. Over the next few days, the crew of the Odyssey worked tirelessly to prepare for departure. Weapons systems were checked and rechecked, shields reinforced, and supplies stocked. Morale was low, but the sense of duty kept everyone focused. As the ship's engines roared to life and it broke free of Earth's orbit, a mixture of fear and determination filled the air. Through the viewport, Daniel watched as the blue-green orb of Earth grew smaller and smaller. He knew the odds were against them, but he also knew they couldn't afford to fail. Whatever awaited them out there, they would face it together. And maybe, just maybe, they would find a way to ensure humanity's survival in a galaxy that suddenly seemed much less welcoming. The journey ahead would be long and fraught with danger, but for now, the Odyssey sailed onward, carrying the hopes of an entire species into the unknown. The journey to the edge of human-controlled space was long and quiet, filled with a tension that seemed to seep into every corner of the Odyssey. The crew worked tirelessly, running system checks, monitoring sensors, and preparing for the unknown. Yet beneath their disciplined routines lay a growing unease. Each day brought them closer to the Veilith fleet, and with each passing hour, the questions in their minds grew louder. What did the aliens want? Were they truly hostile, or was this some kind of misunderstanding? And most importantly, why had Earth sent only one ship? Captain Daniel Hayes spent much of his time on the bridge, staring out at the endless expanse of stars. He had always found comfort in the vastness of space, but now it felt oppressive, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The weight of his mission pressed heavily on him, and though he tried to hide it, his crew could see the strain in his eyes. He wasn't just leading a team, he was carrying the hopes of an entire species. Lieutenant Rachel Monroe, the ship's tactical officer, was no stranger to pressure, but even she struggled to keep her focus. She spent hours poring over weapons schematics, trying to find ways to improve the Odyssey's defenses. Her mind raced with scenarios. What if the Veilith attacked without warning? What if their weapons were too advanced to counter? She knew they couldn't afford to be unprepared, but no matter how many simulations she ran, the outcome always felt uncertain. Still, she refused to let doubt take hold. If they were going to face the Veilith, they would do it with everything. They had. Dr. Aaron Blake, the ship's chief scientist, approached the situation differently. While the rest of the crew focused on combat readiness, he immersed himself in studying the intercepted signals from the Veilith fleet. The transmissions were strange, filled with patterns that didn't match any known language. At first, Blake thought they might be encrypted messages, but the more he analyzed them, the more he realized they weren't words at all. They were equations, complex mathematical sequences that seemed to follow a logic beyond human understanding. Blake's breakthrough came late one night when he noticed a recurring pattern in the signals. It wasn't random noise, it was deliberate, almost like a map. Excited, he rushed to the bridge to share his findings with Captain Hayes. "Sir," he said, his voice trembling with urgency, "I think I've figured something out. These signals aren't just communication, they're coordinates." Hayes raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Coordinates for what?" I'm not sure yet, Blake admitted. But whatever it is, it's important. The Valith keep broadcasting these sequences, over and over again, like they're trying to tell us where to go. Hayes considered this for a moment. Could it be a trap? It's possible, Blake replied. But it could also be an opportunity. If we can decipher the rest of the sequence, we might learn more about their intentions. With little else to go on, Hayes decided to follow the coordinates. The Odyssey adjusted its course, heading toward the location indicated by the alien signals. As they traveled, the crew tried to stay optimistic, but the silence from Earth Command only deepened their unease. Why hadn't they received further instructions? Was humanity abandoning them, or was there something more sinister at play? Weeks passed, and the journey began to wear on everyone. Ensign Lucas Carter, the youngest member of the senior staff, felt the strain more than most. He had joined the USC eager to make a difference, but now he wondered if he was ready for what lay ahead. His dreams were plagued by visions of battle, of being overwhelmed by superior forces. During waking hours, he threw himself into his work, practicing maneuvers and running flight simulations until his hands ached. Yet no matter how hard he pushed himself, the fear lingered. One evening, as the Odyssey drifted through the void, Rachel approached Lucas in the ship's rec room. He was sitting alone, staring blankly at a cup of coffee. "Hey," she said softly, sitting down across from him. "You okay?" Lucas hesitated before answering. "I don't know," he admitted. "I keep thinking about what happens if we fail, if we're not enough." Rachel nodded, understanding his concerns all too well. "We've all been there," she said, "but you can't let it get to you. Focus on what you can control. That's all any of us can do." Her words helped, but only a little. Lucas still felt the weight of expectation pressing down on him, and he knew he wouldn't find peace until the mission was over. Finally, after weeks of travel, the Odyssey reached the coordinates. What they found there took their breath away. Spread out across the blackness of space was a massive formation of alien ships, hundreds of them, arranged in a perfect sphere around a glowing object at the center. The ships themselves were enormous, their sleek designs shimmering faintly in the light of nearby stars. But it was the object at the heart of the formation that drew everyone's attention. It pulsed with energy, a soft, rhythmic glow that seemed alive. Its surface was smooth and metallic, covered in intricate patterns that shifted and changed as if responding to some unseen force. The artifact radiated power, a presence so strong it almost felt tangible. No one spoke as they stared at it, their awe mingling with a growing sense of dread. "What is that thing?" Lucas whispered, breaking the silence. "I don't know," Hayes replied, his voice low. "But I have a feeling it's why the Valith are here." As the Odyssey moved closer, the alien fleet reacted. Dozens of smaller craft detached from the larger ships and began moving toward them, surrounding the human vessel in a tight formation. Tension gripped the bridge as the crew prepared for the worst. Weapons systems were brought online, shields reinforced, and communication attempts initiated. But the Valith ships remained silent, their intentions unclear. Dr. Blake worked frantically to establish contact, using the mathematical sequences he had decoded earlier. For hours, there was no response, and the crew braced themselves for an attack. Then, just as hope began to fade, the Valith finally answered. Their reply was brief but unmistakable, a series of numbers flashing across the Odyssey's screens. "They're communicating," Blake exclaimed, his excitement barely contained. "They understand mathematics. We can use that to build a dialogue." With Blake's guidance, the crew constructed a message of their own, a simple equation designed to convey peaceful intent. When they transmitted it, the Valith responded almost immediately. Over the next few hours, the exchange continued, each side building on the previous message. Slowly but surely, a rudimentary form of communication began to take shape. Through trial and error, Blake managed to piece together fragments of information. The Valith identified themselves as guardians of the glowing artifact, which they referred to as the Nexus. They claimed it was a relic of immense power, capable of reshaping reality itself, but they also warned that its misuse could destroy entire civilizations. The revelation sent a chill through the crew. If the Nexus was as dangerous as the Valith claimed, then humanity was in far greater danger than anyone had realized. Yet, despite the warnings, the Valith insisted that the Odyssey leave immediately. They made it clear that they didn't believe humanity was ready to handle such responsibility. Hayes faced a dilemma. Returning empty-handed meant leaving Earth vulnerable. If the Valith decided to act against humanity, no defense would stop them. But staying put risked provoking a conflict they couldn't win. As the captain weighed his options, Rachel proposed a bold plan. "We infiltrate the Nexus," she suggested. "If we can disable it temporarily, we buy Earth time to prepare. It's risky, but it might prevent outright war." The idea was met with skepticism, but Hayes knew it was their best chance. After much deliberation, he gave the order to proceed. The crew sprang into action, formulating a strategy to breach the artifact while avoiding detection. It was a desperate gamble, but failure wasn't an option. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The Odyssey drifted silently in, the shadow of the Valith fleet, its crew united by a shared purpose. Though fear lingered in their hearts, they refused to give in to despair. Outnumbered and outgunned, they clung to the hope that they could find a way to survive, and perhaps even thrive in a galaxy that had suddenly become far less forgiving. The plan was set, but the weight of it hung heavy over the crew of the Odyssey. Infiltrating the Nexus was risky, dangerous, and likely suicidal, yet no one spoke against it. They knew what was at stake, humanity's survival, and they were determined to do whatever it took to protect Earth. Captain Daniel Hayes gave the final orders, his voice calm but firm as he addressed the team. "This mission is critical," he said. "If we fail, Earth has no chance. If we succeed, we buy humanity time to prepare. Stay sharp, stay focused, and trust each other." Lieutenant Rachel Monroe led the infiltration team, her tactical expertise making her the obvious choice. Alongside her were Ensign Lucas Carter, whose piloting skills would be crucial for navigating the alien artifact, and Dr. Aaron Blake, who hoped to use his understanding of Valith technology to disable the Nexus. The rest of the crew stayed aboard the Odyssey, ready to provide support or extract the team if things went wrong. Under the cover of darkness, or rather, the absence of light in space, the team launched a small shuttle disguised as debris. Its exterior was painted with reflective materials scavenged from damaged parts of the ship, designed to mimic the metallic fragments floating around the Valith fleet. As the shuttle drifted toward the glowing artifact at the center of the formation, the tension on board was palpable. No one spoke, their eyes glued to the viewport as the massive alien ships loomed larger with every passing second. When they reached the Nexus, the team marveled at its size and complexity. Up close, the artifact was even more awe-inspiring than it had appeared from afar. Its surface shimmered like liquid metal, constantly shifting and rearranging itself in patterns that seemed almost alive. Strange symbols pulsed faintly across. Its exterior, glowing brighter in some areas and dimming in others. The air inside the shuttle felt charged with energy, as though the Nexus itself was aware of their presence. "Stay alert," Rachel whispered, breaking the silence. "We don't know what kind of defenses this thing has," Lucas nodded, his hands steady on the controls as he guided the shuttle closer. Dr. Blake monitored the readings from the ship's sensors, trying to identify any potential threats. "I'm not detecting anything unusual yet," he said. "But that doesn't mean it's safe. This is alien technology. We can't assume anything." The shuttle docked at a section of the Nexus that seemed less active than the rest. The team suited up in their environmental gear, checking their equipment one last time before stepping out into the unknown. As they approached the artifact, they noticed something odd. The surface rippled slightly beneath their boots, as if responding to their touch. It wasn't solid, at least not in the way they understood solidity. It felt more like walking on water, except there was no resistance, no splash, just a strange sensation of being supported by an invisible force. "This is unlike anything I've ever seen," Blake muttered, running a scanner over the surface. "It's not just technology, it's almost organic, like it's alive." Rachel ignored him, focusing instead on finding a way inside. After a few minutes of searching, they discovered a seam in the Nexus's surface, a thin line that glowed faintly when touched. Blake studied it carefully, comparing its pattern to the mathematical sequences they had used to communicate with the Veilith. "This might be an entrance," he said, "but opening it could trigger alarms." "We don't have a choice," Rachel replied. "If we're going to disable this thing, we need to get inside." Blake hesitated, then nodded. Using the data from his scans, he input a series of numbers into a handheld device connected to the seam. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low hum, the seam began to widen, revealing a dark opening that led deeper into the artifact. The team exchanged nervous glances before stepping inside. What awaited them was beyond comprehension. The interior of the Nexus was a labyrinth of shifting walls and gravity-defying corridors. One moment, they walked along a flat surface. The next, the floor tilted sideways, forcing them to adjust their footing mid-step. Lights flickered erratically, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. Strange noises echoed through the structure, low rumbles, high-pitched whines, and occasional bursts of static-like crackling. "This place is messing with my head," Lucas muttered, gripping the wall to steady himself as the floor shifted again. "It's designed to disorient." "Intruders," Blake said, his voice strained. "Every step we take triggers changes in the environment. We need to move quickly before it adapts further." As they pressed onward, the team encountered increasingly bizarre phenomena. At one point, Rachel reached out to touch a glowing panel on the wall, only to recoil as it projected an image of Earth surrounded by fire and destruction. Another time, Lucas stumbled upon a mirror-like surface that showed not his reflection, but a vision of himself as an old man, alone and broken. Each experience left them shaken, testing their resolve in ways they hadn't anticipated. Dr. Blake tried to explain what was happening. "The Nexus isn't just a machine, it's a test. It's probing our minds, showing us our fears and doubts. We have to push through it if we want to reach the core." Easier said than done. Rachel found herself haunted by memories of past missions gone wrong, moments where her decisions had led to loss and failure. She clenched her fists, forcing herself to focus on the present. Lucas wrestled with visions of never living up to, expectations of being dismissed as too young or inexperienced to make a difference. Even Blake wasn't immune. He saw flashes of his family, long estranged, accusing him of abandoning them for his work. Despite the psychological toll, they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that failure meant the end of humanity. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached the heart of the Nexus. There, suspended in a chamber filled with pulsating energy, was the core, a crystalline structure that glowed with an intense, otherworldly light. It pulsed rhythmically, as if breathing, and emitted a low hum that resonated deep within their chests. "That's it," Blake said, his voice trembling with awe. "That's the source of the Nexus's power." Rachel examined the core closely, looking for a way to disable it. "Can you shut it down?" she asked. "I think so," Blake replied. "But it won't be easy. The mechanisms are alien, and interfering with them could destabilize the entire structure." "We don't have time to debate," Rachel snapped. "Do what you can. We'll deal with the consequences later." Blake nodded and set to work, using improvised tools to manipulate the core's connections. The process was slow and painstaking, requiring precision and patience. Every movement felt like walking a tightrope, one wrong step away from disaster. Meanwhile, Rachel and Lucas kept watch, their weapons drawn as they scanned the chamber for signs of danger. As Blake worked, the Nexus began to react. The walls shifted violently, the lights flickered faster, and the hum grew louder, almost deafening. Then, without warning, alarms blared throughout the structure, a piercing sound that reverberated through their helmets. The Veilith fleet outside sprang into action, dozens of ships detaching from the formation and heading straight for the Odyssey. "They know we're here," Lucas shouted, panic creeping into his voice. "Stay focused," Rachel barked. "We're not leaving until this is done." Blake worked faster, sweat dripping down his face despite the coolness of his suit. Finally, with a soft click, the core destabilized. The pulsing light dimmed, and the hum faded into silence. For a moment, everything seemed still. Then, with a violent shudder, the Nexus unleashed a shockwave that knocked out both the Odyssey and several Veilith ships. The team barely had time to brace themselves before the artifact collapsed inward, its energy dissipating into nothingness. The walls of the chamber began to dissolve, pulling apart like threads unraveling from a tapestry. "Move!" Rachel yelled, grabbing Blake and dragging him toward the exit. Lucas followed close behind, his movements frantic as the ground beneath them started to crumble. They barely made it back to the shuttle before the Nexus imploded, its once glorious form reduced to a cloud of dust and debris. As the team climbed aboard and prepared for liftoff, they watched the remains of the artifact drift away, silent witnesses to their desperate gamble. Back aboard the Odyssey, the crew breathed a collective sigh of relief as the infiltration team returned safely. But their victory was short-lived. The Valeth fleet regrouped, their ships forming a tight perimeter around the human vessel. For a tense moment, it seemed like war was inevitable. Then, unexpectedly, the aliens withdrew, their intentions unclear but seemingly non-hostile. Hayes stood on the bridge, watching as the Valeth fleet disappeared into the void. He didn't know what the future held, but for now, humanity had survived. The Nexus was gone, its power neutralized, and Earth had been given a fighting chance. It wasn't much, but it was enough. As the Odyssey turned toward home, its crew reflected on what they had accomplished. They had faced the unknown, confronted their fears, and emerged victorious, not because they were stronger or smarter, but because they had refused to give up. And in doing so, they had proven that even in the darkest moments, hope could still shine through. The Odyssey limped through space, its systems battered and its crew exhausted. The shockwave from the Nexus's collapse had left the ship damaged, but still operational, a small miracle considering the forces they had faced. Captain Daniel Hayes stood on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the view screen as the Valeth fleet vanished into the distance. Their withdrawal was unexpected, almost too good to be true. Had disabling the Nexus been enough to convince them that humanity wasn't a threat? Or were they simply regrouping, planning their next move? The silence aboard the ship was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the engines and the occasional report from the engineering team working to repair critical systems. Lieutenant Rachel Monroe sat at her station, staring blankly at her console. Her mind raced with questions. What had they just done? Had they truly neutralized the Nexus? Or had they merely delayed the inevitable? She glanced over at Dr. Aaron Blake, who sat slumped in his chair, his face pale and drawn. Even he, the man who had deciphered the alien signals and guided them through the labyrinth of the Nexus, seemed unsure of what to make of their victory. Ensign Lucas Carter, on the other hand, couldn't sit still. He paced back and forth across the bridge, his hands trembling slightly as he replayed the events of the past hours in his mind. The visions he had seen inside the Nexus, the doubts, the fears, still lingered, gnawing at him. He wanted to believe. They had done the right thing, but the uncertainty weighed heavily on him. "Do you think we made a difference?" he asked finally, breaking the silence. Hayes turned to look at him, his expression unreadable. "We did what we had to do," he said simply. "Whether it was enough? Only time will tell." Rachel nodded slowly, though her thoughts were far from settled. She knew they had bought Earth some time, but how much? Days? Weeks? Months? The Valeth were advanced, far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. If they decided to return, there might not be anything Earth could do to stop them. Still, she pushed those thoughts aside. They had survived this far, and that was something. For now, they needed to focus on getting home. Dr. Blake finally spoke up, his voice quiet but steady. "The Nexus is gone, but the Valeth didn't destroy us outright. That has to mean something. Maybe they respect restraint, or maybe they're just waiting to see what we'll do next. Or maybe they're testing us," Rachel added grimly. "If they're guardians of something that powerful, they probably don't trust easily. Disabling the Nexus might have been step one of their evaluation." Hayes considered this for a moment, then shook his head. "It doesn't matter why they left. What matters is that we're still here. We've got a job to finish, and that's getting this ship back to Earth." The journey home was slow and arduous. The Odyssey's engines were damaged, forcing them to rely on auxiliary power to maintain life support and basic navigation. The engineering team worked around the clock, patching leaks, rerouting power, and stabilizing the ship's failing systems. Despite their efforts, progress was frustratingly slow. Every hour felt like an eternity, and the tension aboard the ship remained high. No one dared to relax, not while they were still so far from safety. As the days dragged on, the crew found themselves reflecting on everything they had been through. Conversations became quieter, more introspective. Even Lucas, who usually filled the air with nervous chatter, grew subdued. He spent hours alone in the observation deck, staring out at the stars and thinking about what he had seen inside the Nexus. The vision of himself as an old man, alone and bitter, haunted him. Was that his future? Or had the Nexus simply shown him his greatest fear? He didn't know, and the uncertainty gnawed at him. Rachel, too, wrestled with her own reflections. The images of past failures, the missions where her decisions had cost lives, had shaken her deeply. She had always prided herself on being strong, unshakable, but now she wondered if that strength was just a facade. Had she been fooling herself all along? Or was she capable of learning from her mistakes and becoming better? Dr. Blake, meanwhile, threw himself into analyzing the data they had collected during their encounter with the Nexus. He hoped to uncover more about its purpose, its creators, and why the Valith had been so determined to protect it. But the answers eluded him, hidden behind layers of alien logic and technology far beyond human understanding. Frustrated but unwilling to give up, he continued his work, hoping that even a small breakthrough might help humanity prepare for whatever came next. Captain Hayes, for his part, tried to keep morale high, but it was a difficult task. He held regular meetings with his senior staff, encouraging open dialogue and addressing concerns as best he could. Yet even he struggled to find words of reassurance when the future was so uncertain. All he could do was remind them of what they had accomplished and urge them to stay focused on the present. Finally, after weeks of painstaking repairs and careful navigation, the Odyssey approached Earth's orbit. The sight of the planet brought tears to more than one pair of eyes. Its blue-green surface, dotted with swirling clouds, was a reminder of everything they had fought to protect. For a brief moment, the weight of their mission lifted, replaced by a sense of relief and gratitude. Admiral Laura Bennett greeted them personally as the Odyssey docked at the orbital headquarters station. Her expression was grim, but there was a flicker of pride in her eyes as she welcomed the crew back. "You've done well," she said to Hayes as they stood together on the observation deck, looking out at Earth. "Better than anyone could have expected." "We did what we had to do," Hayes replied, echoing his earlier words to Lucas. "But it's not over. The Valith are still out there, and we don't know what they'll do next." Bennett nodded, her gaze distant. "I know. And I owe you an explanation. Sending only one ship. It wasn't just about showing restraint. Intelligence suggested the Valith value, caution, and respect those who act deliberately. We gambled that sending the Odyssey alone would demonstrate our willingness to cooperate rather than provoke. And if it hadn't worked?" Hayes asked, his tone sharp. "Then we'd have faced the consequences," Bennett admitted. "But we had to take the risk. Humanity isn't ready for a war with a species like the Valith. Not yet." Hayes didn't respond immediately. He understood the logic behind the decision, but that didn't make it any easier to accept. The burden of command had rested squarely on his shoulders, and he had carried it without complaint. Now, standing here, he allowed himself a moment of vulnerability. "How long do you think we have?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," Bennett said honestly. "Days, months, years, it's impossible to say. But your actions bought us time, and that's more than we had before." The debriefing that followed was long and grueling. Hayes and his senior staff recounted every detail of their encounter with the Valith and the Nexus, answering questions and providing analysis. The information they shared would shape Earth's strategy moving forward. But no one pretended it was enough. The Valith were still a mystery, their intentions unclear, and humanity's survival depended on preparing for the worst. In the days that followed, the crew of the Odyssey began to settle back into their routines. Repairs were completed, reports filed, and commendations awarded. To the outside world, they were heroes, celebrated for their bravery and ingenuity. But among themselves, they remained humble, aware of how close they had come to failure. Rachel spent her free time working on new tactical strategies, determined to ensure that humanity would be better prepared if the Valith returned. Lucas threw himself into training exercises, pushing himself harder than ever before. Dr. Blake continued his research, poring over the data they had collected in the hopes of unlocking more secrets about the Nexus and its creators. And Captain Hayes? Hayes took long walks through the station, watching Earth rotate silently below. He knew the peace they had found was fragile, a temporary reprieve in an uncertain galaxy. But for now, it was enough. The Odyssey had sailed into the unknown and returned, battered but intact. It had faced the unimaginable and emerged victorious, not because it was stronger or smarter, but because its crew had refused to give up. They had proven that even in the face of overwhelming odds, hope could still shine through. And though the future remained uncertain, they clung to that hope, knowing it was the only thing that could carry them forward. As the stars stretched endlessly beyond the viewport, the crew of the Odyssey prepared for whatever lay ahead. They had faced the Valith and survived, but they knew the galaxy was vast and full of dangers yet unseen. For now, they rested, healed, and prepared. Because one day they might be called upon again, and when that day came, they would answer. The days turned into weeks, and life aboard the orbital headquarters station settled into a rhythm of preparation and reflection. The crew of the Odyssey had become symbols of hope for humanity, their faces appearing in news broadcasts and their stories shared across the globe. Yet beneath the surface of celebration and gratitude, there was an undercurrent of unease. The Valith were still out there, their withdrawal from the Nexus incident unexplained and their intentions unclear. Humanity had been given a reprieve, but no one knew how long it would last. Captain Daniel Hayes found himself torn between pride and anxiety. On one hand, he was grateful for the recognition his crew had received. They had faced unimaginable odds and returned alive, something many had doubted possible. But on the other hand, he couldn't shake the feeling that their victory was incomplete. Disabling the Nexus had been a desperate gamble, and while it had worked, it didn't erase the fact that Earth was still vulnerable. The Valiths advanced. Technology and mysterious motives made them an unpredictable threat, one that humanity wasn't ready to face. Hayes spent much of his time meeting with Admiral Laura Bennett and other military leaders, discussing strategies for strengthening Earth's defenses. Plans were drawn up to expand the fleet, develop new weapons systems, and establish early warning networks across human-controlled space. But progress was slow, hampered by limited resources and political disagreements. Every decision felt like a race against time, as though the clock was ticking down to another encounter with the Valith. Lieutenant Rachel Monroe threw herself into her work, determined to ensure that humanity would be better prepared if the aliens returned. She spent hours running simulations, testing new tactics, and training junior officers in combat scenarios. Her focus was relentless, almost obsessive, driven by the knowledge that failure wasn't an option. Still, there were moments when she allowed herself to pause and reflect. The visions she had seen inside the Nexus, the memories of past failures, lingered in her mind, a constant reminder of the weight of her responsibilities. She wondered if she would ever truly move past them, or if they would always haunt her, shaping her decisions in ways she couldn't control. Dr. Aaron Blake continued his research, poring over the data collected during their encounter with the Nexus. He hoped to uncover more about its purpose, its creators, and why the Valith had been so determined to protect it. The artifact's alien logic baffled him at every turn, its patterns defying conventional understanding. Yet despite the frustration, he refused to give up. Each small breakthrough, no matter how minor, felt like a step forward, a way to prepare humanity for the unknown dangers of the galaxy. Late at night, when the station was quiet, he often sat alone in his lab, staring at the glowing screens and wondering if they would ever fully understand the forces they had encountered. Ensign Lucas Carter, meanwhile, struggled to find his footing. The mission had changed him in ways he couldn't fully articulate. The visions he had seen inside the Nexus, the doubts and fears, had shaken his confidence, leaving him questioning whether he was truly cut out for this life. He pushed himself harder than ever before, throwing himself into training exercises and seeking feedback from senior officers. But no matter how much he improved, he couldn't silence the voice in his head that whispered he wasn't good enough. It was Lieutenant Rachel Monroe who finally noticed his struggle. One evening, she approached him in the rec room where he sat staring blankly at a cup of coffee. "You've been working yourself too hard," she said gently, sitting down beside him. "You're going to burn out if you keep this up." Lucas hesitated before responding. I feel like I have something to prove," he admitted. "Like I need to show everyone, and myself, that I belong here." Rachel nodded, understanding all too well. "We all feel that way sometimes," she said. "But you can't let it consume you. You did your job back there. You held it together when it mattered most. That's what counts." Her words helped, but only a little. Lucas still felt the weight of expectation pressing down on him, and he knew he wouldn't find peace until he proved himself again. As the weeks passed, the crew of the Odyssey began to settle into their new roles. Repairs on the ship were completed, and preparations were made for its next mission. Hayes gathered his senior staff for one final briefing before they dispersed, each returning to their respective duties. "This isn't the end," he told them, his voice firm but kind. "It's just the beginning. We've bought ourselves some time, but we can't afford to waste it. Stay sharp, stay focused, and remember what we've learned." The crew nodded, their expressions a mix of determination and resolve. They knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges they couldn't yet imagine. But they also knew they had faced the impossible before and survived. Whatever came next, they would face it together. When the Odyssey finally departed, from the orbital station it carried not just its crew but the hopes of an entire species. Its journey back into the stars was a symbol of humanity's resilience, a testament to the courage and ingenuity that had brought them this far. As captain, Hayes stood on the bridge, watching Earth grow smaller and smaller. He felt a sense of pride mingled with uncertainty. They had survived their first encounter with the Valith, but he knew it wouldn't be their last. The galaxy was vast and full of mysteries, some beautiful, others dangerous. Humanity had taken its first steps into the unknown, but it was clear that the path ahead would be fraught with peril. The Nexus was gone, its power neutralized, but the Valith remained, guardians of secrets humanity had yet to uncover, and somewhere beyond the horizon the Nexus waited, silent but watchful, a reminder of the fragile line between survival and destruction. As the Odyssey sailed onward, its crew reflected on everything they had been through. They had faced their fears, confronted their doubts, and emerged stronger for it. They had proven that even in the darkest moments, hope could still shine through. And though the future remained uncertain, they clung to that hope, knowing it was the only thing that could carry them forward. Through the viewport, the stars stretched endlessly, a sea of possibilities waiting to be explored. The crew of the Odyssey watched them pass, their hearts filled with a mixture of fear and determination. They had faced the unknown once, and they had survived. If they were called upon again, they would answer, because that was who they were, not just soldiers or explorers, but pioneers, stepping boldly into the great expanse of the universe. And so, the Odyssey sailed onward, carrying the dreams and fears of humanity into